On today's World Insight, the World Trade Organization, its global significance 3 decades after its founding, along with China's history and evolution in a multilateral trading system. That's up for discussion with a strong panel of guests at a forum of the ongoing 7th China International Import Expo in Shanghai.
Welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. Embrace trade, embrace the future. Our special program from Shanghai at the 7th CIIE. Since its initiation in the year 2018, the China International Import Expo has kept injecting impetus to investment, openness, and people-to-people exchanges. It also offers real opportunities to hear diverse perspectives about trade policies, especially voices coming from the business community. On the very first day of the 7th CIIE, I moderated a panel, The WTO at 30 and China, History and Evolution. Business leaders, government officials, and scholars dive into the issue surrounding today's multilateral trading system and the role of China in promoting bilateral trade, as well as the reform of WTO. At the panel, I asked Xiaozhun, former Vice Minister of Commerce from China, and also former Deputy Director General of World Trade Organization, how relevant the WTO still is today. Thank you so much, Minister Yi. I really want to know what is likely to be the role of WTO. Is it still relevant today? You, as a former ambassador of WTO, from China to WTO, and later serving as Deputy Director General of WTO, probably you could provide us with some answer. Please, sir.
我在今年就在9月份的时候，在 WTO 的公共论坛上。
I must emphasize that in September this year, during the WTO Public Forum, I specifically addressed this issue. I stated that if we do not undertake necessary reforms and strengthen the multilateral trading system, the WTO could become a paper tiger. In my view, the main challenge today is that the WTO is experiencing the most difficult and dark period in its 70-year history, largely due to the global spread of protectionism. Another major issue is the leadership vacuum within the WTO. In addition, a significant problem is the prolonged stagnation in multilateral trade negotiations, with no new results being achieved. To put it simply, the main reason for this situation is that the world's largest economy has abandoned its commitment to the multilateral trading system. From being the global policeman safeguarding multilateral trade rules, it has now, in a complete 180-degree turn, become the leader in violating WTO rules. This is a harsh reality we must face, and it is, without a doubt, a tragedy for the WTO. I remember 3 years ago, when I was leaving the WTO, the then Director General saw me off. I had raised this very issue with him while I was in Geneva. I told him, as you send us off, you said, please leave with some valuable advice on how to restore the WTO to its former glory. I said, your most important task is to ensure that geopolitics and the power struggles of major countries are kept out of the WTO. After all, the WTO is a world trade organization, a trade organization. It is not a place for geopolitical maneuvering. Therefore, the WTO should focus on solving trade issues and not allow itself to become a battleground for ideological conflicts or geopolitical rivalry. When he spoke at that time, I could see him nodding frequently. But in reality, I also knew that this task would be very difficult for him to accomplish. I estimate that in the next 10 to 20 years, it may be extremely challenging to continue pushing for further trade liberalization through the WTO. We must have a realistic and sober assessment of the situation. However, a strong and effective multilateral trading system is indispensable for world trade. So, in this dilemma, what should the world do? What should China do? I think this is a question on everyone's minds. I would like to offer some personal suggestions on 3 levels. On the multilateral level, I actually mentioned this at the WTO Public Forum this year. I believe that if the world's largest economy abandons its leadership role within the WTO and is unwilling to continue advancing along the path of multilateralism, then the vast majority of other WTO members should unite more clearly and firmly. They should come together within the framework of the multilateral trading system to work towards reaching new trade agreements. I believe that after some time, perhaps 10 years, perhaps 15 years, following a period of trial and error and reflection, the largest economy will eventually return to the correct path of multilateralism. The second level is the regional level. Countries can still continue to work towards advancing negotiations for multilateral free trade agreements as a response to the global backlash against globalization. Through the conclusion of these new free trade agreements, they can demonstrate their commitment to advancing trade liberalization and continuing on the path of economic integration. I believe this progress would be a strong impetus for the WTO, because before I left Geneva, I heard many members at the General Council meetings warning that if the WTO cannot continue to negotiate new agreements, it could be marginalized by countries in Asia. This was particularly relevant as we had just concluded the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. Finally, at the national level, I believe China should take on a greater responsibility by providing more public goods for WTO members. We need to proactively open up our markets to promote multilateral win-win cooperation. We must take the lead in adhering to multilateral rules in order to gain the trust of all parties. As the world moves toward a multipolar development, we should strengthen cooperation with other members and work to help the WTO gradually form a new global trade governance order based on collective leadership and effective cooperative management.
在这个世界往多极化发展的时候呢，我们应该加强和其他成员的合作，推动 WTO 逐步形成一个集体领导和良性共治的全球贸易治理的一个新的秩序。
赶快追问一下，那每个国家都
Do you think every country can fine-tune its policies as China to accede to the WTO?
所以这就是 WTO 存在的这个 value。
This is the value of the WTO. The reason it exists is because it has a multilateral set of rules, and these rules should be followed by every country. Although not every country may adhere to them conscientiously at present, it is precisely these rules that provide a stable and favorable trading environment for global trade. Specifically, if you unilaterally violate this regulation by claiming that you need policy space, what you're actually referring to as policy space is the trade interests of other countries. For example, if China says it wants to raise its automobile tariffs, other countries such as Germany, Italy, Japan, and ROK would certainly object, arguing that by raising tariffs, you're damaging their interests. So, this is a balance between rights and obligations. I believe everyone should consciously abide by the multilateral rules of the WTO. For some small developing countries, it may be reasonable for them to require a transition period or a certain amount of time to adjust and develop, in which case their demand for policy space is understandable. But what surprises me now is that some large economies and developed countries are also seeking policy space.
要这个政策空间，我觉得这样是没有道理的。
The world's largest import expo, a global stage for trade and investment. A place for meaningful connections. In times of uncertainty, CIIE has become the hub for shared opportunities. And that's why we are here for the 7th time. I am moderating panels at the Hometown Forum, leading discussions with trailblazers in global trade. Catch it all on World Insight from Shanghai. Embrace trade. Embrace the future. You're watching our special program on site of the 7th CIIE. In the fragmented and more inward-looking world, organizations like the WTO are more critical than ever in binding global trade together, and China will remain an active member and a supporter of free trade. Looking forward, panelists share their expectations of the WTO and China. Take a listen. I would start by asking the three of you to share with us general remarks about your thoughts of the future of WTO, the role of China could be, and also the systematic opening up steadily, how is it going to be done? Let's start with Mr. Wang.
我们国家有史以来积极履行了我们自己热市的承诺。
Since our country's accession to the WTO, we have actively fulfilled our commitments and made constructive contributions to keeping the multilateral trading system and participating in the world economic governance. I believe these are China's roles in the World Trade Organization. First, China should be a keeper of the multilateral trading system. Secondly, the Chinese people and Chinese government shall certainly be advocates of multilateral trade talks. Third, we should aid trade and help developing countries step up their trade abilities. I believe this is the responsibility that China, as a global trading power, should have.
我想这也是我们这个中国作为一个大国所应有的担当。
Thank you very much, Professor Wang. Now let's move on to Stephen Barnett, Senior Resident Representative of IMF in China. Steve has a special interest in consumption, but I really wonder what is your opening remark for this about WTO, please.
Actually going to talk about the global economy. Aside from that's what we do at the IMF. If you give me a minute, I'm going to convince you it's highly relevant for the focus of today's meeting. We just finished our annual meetings in Washington. And at the very beginning of that, the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, she really made a plea, and she summarized the key message really simply. We can do better. What does that mean? We can do better. And let me cut the suspense and say why that's relevant. A key way we can do better is through reinvigorating international cooperation, and in particular, for trade. So why is it we're saying we can do better? In some ways, the global economy is not doing so bad. It looks like inflation is coming down globally. It looks like we're going to have a soft landing for the first time ever. But if we step back a little bit, the global outlook is basically stable, but underwhelming. Clearly, we can do better than underwhelming. And why do we say it's underwhelming? We forecast global growth basically 3.25%. So last year was 3.3, this year's 3.2, next year's 3.2. For comparison, the 2 decades before the pandemic, global growth was 3.8. 3.2 is clearly underwhelming relative to 3.8. Second thing is the global economy has a lot of scarring from the pandemic. Basically, output today, worldwide, is about 3.5% to 4% below where it should be, where we thought it would be before the pandemic. So not only are we growing slow, underwhelming, we're much smaller than we thought we would be before the pandemic. And the third and last is if you look at the medium term, and for the IMF, medium term is 5 years. Our 5-year forecast is the lowest we've had, at least going back to the 90s. I couldn't find records back earlier, but we forecast 3.1% growth 5 years out. Just for perspective, before the pandemic, we forecast medium-term growth at 3.6. Very underwhelming. So when the head of the IMF says we can do better than this 3.1, and quickly on, we know that international cooperation is key. I want to pick up what Fabian was saying. It's clearly key for climate change, but it's also clear that we need this to reinvigorate global trade. Trade's been such an important engine of growth. And with medium-term growth prospects being underwhelming, we need to jumpstart trade so it can, again, be an engine of growth.
Thank you, Stephen. I see you're suggesting about the what, right? And now, in the next round, I'm going to ask you how. All right, thank you so much. Let's go to Carlo D'Andrea, the Vice President and Chairman of Shanghai Chapter Board of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. It's a very long title, but it's good to see you once again, Carlo. Tell us about your thoughts, 4 to 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
We can do better. I love that. There was also a song, we can do better. Very good. And I believe China did incredible results in the past years. But when I was getting ready, what should I say today? in order to do my remarks. So then I went on YouTube, and I was checking the video of the former president of US, Bill Clinton, when China accession of the WTO, no? He was so excited, saying, you know, we will have less IPR infringements, we will have more rule of law, we will have more trade with China, and in some sense, this is something very, very actual, the speech of over 30 years ago, 20 plus years ago, and China did tremendous improvement on the trade part, and becoming one of the major economies of the world. And of course, many of our members, the European Association, European Chamber of Commerce is one of the largest business associations here, 1,700 members, and based all around China. They are committed to the Chinese market. Nevertheless, China can do better in order to improve the IPR system, in order to improve the legal framework, in order to lower the market access barrier that still is a big hassle for Europeans to continue to invest in this market. And in fact, I don't want to be the party crasher, but you know, this time on the business conference survey was for the first time, the percentage was the lowest one of European companies that they are willing to invest more into the Chinese market. So I'm very pleased to hear the commitment of the central leadership and the fact that Li Chang, Vice Minister Lin Fei was here, big commitment to the growth of Shanghai, and yes, we can do better.
As we said, we can do better, China can do better, and Europe can do better too. Yeah, but we have noticed, please Carlo, if you want to add anything.
Yes, I love it. You know, you can start to check my title. You know, in Europe, we like a lot of bureaucracy. So the longer, the better, you know, like more complicated is the process. But indeed, what we want to share with you is that if we want to make a metaphor for Chinese companies, Europe is a 5-star hotel breakfast buffet. Instead, for European company here in China, there are still a lot of restrictions, and this 5-star hotel buffet, it gets like 3 dishes of 1 soup. So we still have a lot of opportunity here, untapped. If we are discussing with economists, we say we have a lot of blue ocean opportunities, and this is why the reason as European Chamber of Commerce we like to say that we can do better. We do not renegade or forget how China make our company very successful and how is important the relationship with China. What is important is the China continuing trajectory of opening up.
I think everybody can do better, and as a result, if it is a multilateral trading system like WTO, then we collectively can do better. So having said that though, let me move on to Stephen. You see a lot of discussion about industrial policies today. Very different opinions, depending on the sectors also. So how do you see this discussion at this moment? How do you see this is impacting, you know, the nature of discussion on many of the other issues that are also crucial? Please.
Indeed, even at the fund now, we're looking a lot more at industrial policy, basically because industrial policy use is on the rise. You know, for a long time, it really wasn't on the agenda, and all of a sudden it's back. And you know, we counted, I think, between January of last year and June of this year, and I hope I have the number right, I think we had around 3,500 industrial policy measures.
All over the world.
All over the world. 60% of those were in advanced economies, actually, and 40% in emerging market and developing economies. We divide the world into 2 buckets. And if I recall, I think just last year, 1/3 of those measures had a discriminatory aspect. 1/3, 2/3. So why are countries doing industrial policies? They do them because they think it might give them a competitive edge, or maybe to address a externality, help in climate transition, or help in national security reasons, supply chain stability. So Miggy, what's the IMF advice in general? And let me cheat to make sure I get this exactly right. But in general, we think that industrial policies really have to focus on narrow objectives of addressing an externality or a market failure. And when we think about this, why is that? Really two reasons. One is there's a real risk that industrial policies lead to a misallocation of resources. And the second is it can lead to international spillovers and retaliation. And in fact, we like numbers at the fund. We looked at the big three, Europe, US, China, and we found if there was an industrial, kind of a trade action in one country, there was a nearly 75% chance of a retaliation by a trading partner within 1 year. So we get this kind of tit-for-tat escalation. And I haven't mentioned China, but that's basically also the logic behind our advice for China. In our last annual report for China, we highlighted that China should scale back its use of industrial policies, really for both of these reasons. Scaling back would promote a better allocation of resources and would mitigate some of the concerns of trading partners. And of course, we'd also welcome more transparency around their industrial policies.
Systematic opening up. You heard that phrase repeatedly, not only here, but also in the policy speeches earlier this morning and earlier within our panel as well. So what do you see is the current stage of a systematic opening up as China suggested?
So our chamber is actually the result of China accession to the WTO, because one of the obligations was the one to allow foreign chamber of commerce to be instituted here in China. And we are the same age as China being the WTO, so we are aging with China. So that said, every year we are publishing a position paper, which is a recommendation made by our 35 working group. We are very sectorial. We have a maritime, very good professor was speaking about the macroplastic, or before we were discussing about climate change, because the green conversion commitment for us is very important, very high in our agenda. Every year, as I said, we prepare this position paper, which got key recommendation for the business doing in China to the Chinese authorities, but as well as to the European authorities. And you know, when we started over 24 plus years ago, the recommendations were just 50, 55. Now, over the year, or we became a bit too picky, or the doing business in China became too complicated, because the last publication, which we launched in September, contained over 1,000 recommendations. And one point that we have here highlight is that China is not for everybody. And it became a game where you need a multinational company to be present in the territory. And this is very not healthy for the innovation ecosystem. So what we did as a chamber in order to contribute to this, and especially we took this platform as a CIIE in order to make a manifesto on that, we organized for the first time ever a small-medium enterprise dialogue here with the Shanghai municipality. We will have the opportunity to have a high level at DG of the Shanghai MOFCOM here, and we bring with us 50 companies in order to tell them which one are the real challenges they are facing on the ground, in order to see that China is more keen to listen also to the small one, because we always repeat to the authority, remember that the multinational company of today, they were the small, medium enterprise of yesterday. So we need to create an ecosystem where everyone can strive.
Were you at the opening ceremony?
I was with my mind and not with my body.
Then if you were there, you must have heard, have the opportunity to hear from the Chinese premier talking about systematic opening up. He's specifically suggesting about the high-level free trade and investment agreements, and also about 言必行，行必果. Words translate into actions. Actions leads to right results. I'm not translating in the 100% perfect way, but it's actually what he was trying to suggest. So it seems that many of the policy papers and suggestions coming from our European counterparts, from the US counterparts, and other business community have got its ears from the decision makers. We hope that will be the practice for the future as well, and not only here, but also elsewhere in the world. Interaction between decision makers and business community is extremely crucial. To Professor Wang, it seems that there is a process, even with China's experience with WTO. At the very beginning, it's pretty much a learner, 100%, and then becomes acceptable to many of the adjustment it needed to make during the past 30 years. And now, as many of our speakers argue, it has become an important contributor, for example, with the discussions going on within WTO. How do you see this process?
After more than 20 years since China joined the WTO, the Chinese economy has changed significantly, with its economic size growing more than tenfold. We have gone from passive recipients of global trade rules to active and important participants, and now we even have the potential to become leaders. Along the way, it mainly stems from the changes in China's economy. We must shoulder a historical responsibility. In that case, I think we should actively contribute to global trade. Second, as China builds up its hard power, it is also growing bigger in terms of soft power. China's higher education has changed dramatically in the past decade. We have trained batches of WTO talent and global economic governance talent for our country and the world. Finally, the international community and some least developed countries also hope that China can participate more.
It's not only just a demonstration of soft power, but also how to take advantage of either its soft power or others to serve the community for the WTO and beyond. So thank you so much. 谢谢大家，谢谢，再次感谢。Thank you 虹桥 Forum and CIIE. 谢谢各位，谢谢。And that's an excerpt of the panel I moderated on the very first day of the 7th CIIE about the WTO and China. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team here in Shanghai and Beijing. Thanks for joining us, and bye for now.